Welcome to our keynote speech. And we are very honored to have Professor Emeritus Asaf Razin from the Bergla School of Economics as our keynote speaker. He was one of the founders of the economics department in this university and dean of social sciences and vice provost. And after his retirement, he was also professor in Cornell University. And all this is just the tip of the iceberg of all the many things that Professor Asaf Razin has achieved and done and contributed. And I frankly, on a personal note, cannot imagine the field of economics in Israel without you and your contributions. So we are very honored to have you. The floor is therefore yours. And I will share, if you want to say a few words before I share the presentation.
Could you just put
The presentation.
the presentation, then I will say a few words.
Let's go. Okay. You want a full screen?
Yeah. But I mean, probably. Okay. Hold on. Thanks, Carl, for the kind words. צהריים טובים לאנשים צעירים, מדעני מדינה, כאלה שעוסקים בתכנון עירוני, אני שומע פה, שקשורים לאיחוד האירופי. בקיצור, אנשים חושבים. אני מודה שקצת חששתי כששמעתי שאלפרד וטל הזמינו אותי פה להרצות, לדבר בפני אולם ומלא באקדמאים של מדעי המדינה. אני כלכלן, ואני משער שלתחומים שלנו יש יותר משותף ממה שאנחנו רוצים להודות. בשני התחומים אנחנו מנסים להבין את ההתנהגות האנושית, לערוב תערובת של בחירה שאנשים עושים או קובעי מדיניות עושים בצורה רציונלית או בצורה לא רציונלית. ואנחנו כולנו הפנמנו שקובעי מדיניות לא תמיד פועלים בהתאם לאינטרסים של הציבור הרחב. הנושא הוא פה אירופה, ואני חסיד גדול של האיחוד האירופי וכן הלאה. ויש הבדל, אני חושב, בין איך מדעי המדינה מסתכלים על האינטגרציה האירופית ואיך אנחנו מסתכלים. שומעים אותי?
שומעים.
עבורנו הכלכלנים, האיחוד האירופי הוא פריצת דרך בתהליך שאנחנו מאוד אוהבים של הגלובליזציה. עבור מדעי המדינה הוא יכול להיות גם חבית נפץ פוליטית שחושפת איך מקבלים ומי מקבלים בפדרציה כזו שעם הרבה ניגודים וגם דברים משותפים, ואיך מקבלים החלטות כשמשהו משתבש. בהומור הייתי אומר שהיתרון שלנו עליכם בהתייחסות לאיחוד האירופי הוא שאתם זוכרים שהיה משבר גדול לפני כעשור, ואז היה כלכלן בשם מריו דרגי, והוא פשוט אמר אמירה אחת פשוטה, 4 מילים, נעשה כל מה שידרש, ובאמירה הזו הוא הצליח למנוע את המשבר. זה היתרון שלנו, שעל ידי משפט אחד פותרים את המשבר. אבל אם אני רוצה להיות קצת יותר הוגן כלפיכם, יש בינינו הכלכלנים גם סוג של קנאה אליכם. כשהדברים לא מסתדרים, אתם, מדעני המדינה, יכולים תמיד למצוא הסברים, ובסופו של דבר אתם יכולים להגיד, טוב, ככה זה אצל פוליטיקאים, אנחנו לא יכולים לעשות את זה. אז עם ההקדמה הזאת שלי, אני מצטער לעבור לאנגלית, זה לא שפת האם שלי, אז תסלחו לי שאני לא מדבר כמו טל בצורה כל כך שוטפת ורהוטה. אז ההרצאה שלי היא קצת יותר ממוקדת מדברי הפתיחה, ואז אני אעבור לאנגלית. It is based on e-book. Its title is a transition to illiberal democracy, economic drivers, and consequences. And I got it out. I edited this ebook with a company of international economists and the Israeli economists. It was inspired, of course, by the judicial overhaul here in Israel that forced me to think about the connection between regime change to economics. And here is the picture, not very bright, but it's an ebook by a very famous organization called CEPR, which is based now, used to be based in London, now it's in Paris, and it's an institution that takes care of all the European economies in terms of their working papers, conferences, and so forth. Anyway, enough for the advertisement. I would like to jump into this more focused subject, which is the regime changes and foreign direct investment. I'm sure that you know what is foreign investment. Not many of you may be familiar with different kinds of foreign investment, and the kind that I'm focusing here, for reasons that I will spell later on, is foreign direct investment, in short FDI. And I organized this presentation as a tale of two countries, Poland and Israel, because these are very interesting two countries and two economies that went through regime changes and globalization and liberalization and illiberalization and so forth. So it seems fit to try to compare in some way the story of Israel and Poland. So, because the inspiration for all this kind of research activity is the transition of countries to illiberalism, I'd like to just outline what do we mean by illiberalism. The policymaker, the politicians, are weakening the independence of institutions and authority, and starting with the judicial institutions, the electoral commissions, and the oversight bodies, what we call Shomrei Saf. They appoint loyalists to key positions. They introduce legal and administrative measures to weaken the opposition. Okay. They, of course, intervene in free speech and free media. Everything that I'm saying is just, for completeness, because obviously you're aware of it. They justify the concentration of authorities and the three branches of government, the judicial, the executive, and the legislative are basically mashed into one executive authority. They also eliminate the terms limit for office holders. And very importantly, they are weakening the civil society, which I say in parentheses was so important in pushing back against what was going on in Israel. And then I say, I would like to look at illiberalism and liberalism for two countries, because they both went through a very successful liberalized regime and moved in a different fashion to illiberal regimes. And I would like to focus on what happened to a very important variable in economics, FDI, which is the driving force for economic growth in a sustainable way. And it is basically the conduit of technology and all of that, which really drives economics in the long run. So Poland, liberalization and globalization, of course, brought prosperity, and it was one of the fastest growing economy in Europe once she embarked into this liberalized regime. And in particular, it was the center of attraction for FDI. And during this time, foreign companies, especially those who are close in terms of geographical distance, like Germany, basically pumped up foreign direct investment, which was an important driving force for the prosperity. And here is an illustration of what happened to Poland's foreign direct investment, and I put it in comparison to I'm trying to see whether OECD.
It's the OECD.
OECD. Okay, thanks. So there was a great catch-up of the Polish increase in FDI relative to OECD after it emerged from communism. And not only that, not only catch up, but also became better, quote unquote, in this respect, relative to OECD, which is a good benchmark for advanced economies, except for, you see at the end, there is a little plateau reached and even a decline. And I'll spend some time on it because I attribute the main force for Poland. I don't know if you can see the figures or the years there. Most of the years that this illustration is containing is the years of liberalization. And in terms of number of foreign firms and multinational enterprises that operating in Poland, you can see here the trend line for Poland over the years. And you can see the remarkable evolution during the liberalization period and the decline in those numbers, number of multinational firms that are involved in the economy of Poland in the illiberal phase of its development. And here is also a remarkable illustration of the foreign ownership or the foreign involvement in Poland. And here you can see in each of the bar, the bottom is 100% ownership in Poland enterprises. And as you go into other segments of the bar, you can see partial ownership. But you can see a remarkable growth of firms that are fully involved in Poland. So it was a major success in terms of foreign investment and especially foreign direct investment. And as you see in the previous slide, which is foreign capital, not the number of firms, but the capital spending by foreign companies, it is a decline that I associate in a sense to the illiberal regime that took place in the last decade.
Escape?
Yeah.
Escape button.
Okay. Now, Israel, now, let me just make one point, which I didn't have time to develop here, because I would like to go over several issues. But you might wonder, why do I pick foreign investment and especially foreign direct investment when I'm looking at regime changes? Because in economics, the main drive from the incentive point of view of consumers and firms is based on property rights, which is the anti-Marx kind of verbal. And all economics, not only of today or in the last 100 years are basically explaining why property rights in various ways are so important for economic growth and other facets of economics. But inside this subject of economic property rights, one very, very sensitive subject is minority rights. And when you talk about foreign investors, they are very sensitive to minority rights when you illiberalize the economy, because their assets could be confiscated, could be hampered, and so forth and so on. So when I look as an economist about this connection between regime change and what's going on in the macroeconomy, I'm basically focusing on foreign investment and especially foreign direct investment, because foreign direct investment is sort of, you bolt your capital as a foreigner because you are basically own an enterprise in the state. So the risk of a policymaker or a government or politician weaken minority rights is much more pronounced than for someone in the foreign countries who is invest in portfolio investments, like in the stock market, because this guy can extricate himself very quickly when the regime is changing towards illiberalism. So I'm trying to explain why I chose this particular research agenda that I'm illustrating here. Now, Israel is, of course, used to be a miracle in terms of its economics. You remember that it started when you were not born, but I was born, as a sort of agrarian economy, completely disconnected from the world, with massive immigration. I'm basically telling you because you know it, but just for complete my argument. And it evolved into, in the early 2000s, to be one of the OECD countries. And one of the driving force when Israel liberalized and integrated to the rest of the world is, of course, the immigration of skilled labor in the early 1990s from the former Soviet Union, which is increased the skill level of the labor force, maybe not for first generation, but for second generation for sure, because the way these skilled immigrants were basically pouring their education into their children and so forth. So one of the important of attraction to foreign direct investment, especially venture capital that finances the tech industry, which is the remarkable achievement for Israel, is if you have an infrastructure of skilled labor force. And also when we liberalized, and there was a thriving private sector in Israel, the entrepreneurship of of Israel population, especially those who are not part of the religious control, and they are basically part of the rest of the world in terms of their mind, their education, and so forth. It also fosters entrepreneurship. So this skill level and entrepreneurship of the Israeli economy was very quickly a focus of attraction for venture capital, which is essential to increase the tech level of the economy. Venture capital is a capital that is subject to the most risky investment than any other country, because you don't know what will come out of startups and innovation. So very ordinary kind of capital that can flow in, even very convenient, conventional FDI is not important in order to create this growth posture of the tech company, the tech sector. So I put the title of Liberalization, Globalization, Free Enterprise, which is an essential part of the liberal regime, and also of the way Israel accommodates the incoming Olim from the Soviet Union, and the way they got absorbed into economic life in Israel. These are basically the underpinning of what came out of the Israeli miracle. And as a matter of fact, the tech sector now in Israel is really the driving force of Israel growth. And in economics, we are distinguishing between short-term growth and sustainable long-term growth. So sometimes, you know, if you look at the publications of the commercial media, they look mostly about short-term growth. They will say, okay, this year, maybe we had negative growth or very close to zero growth. But next year, we'll have maybe 3-4% growth. I don't know if that will materialize. But these are short-term fluctuations. What I'm concerned here about is a durable investment that creates growth. And when Israel started its illiberal development in January 2023, 2 years ago, the victims were basically FDI, venture capitalists, and overall level of investment. In addition, of course, for investment in schools and all of that, which are also, as I just commented on, are the underpinning of sustainable growth. So here is investment in Israel, two types of investment in fixed capital and business investment. You see the drop when the judicial overhaul started, and we think we recovered a little bit at the end, but not fully. We are very far from what we were supposed to have in terms of sustainable growth investment. Now, here are pictures about FDI, Israel versus the OECD countries of developed economies. And you see exactly what I said, that late 1990s, early 2000s, because of all the vector of investment and growth that were done during the 1990s, you see the overshoot of inward FDI flows for Israel relative to the average of the developing economies. This is how remarkable was the change in Israel, and that was during the globalization and liberalization part or phase of Israel development. Here is another picture that extends to more later periods or years. The top is inflows, the bottom is outflows of FDI. And you see again the flattening of the outflows and the drop in the inflows as a result of the changes in the regime. By the way, I didn't spend time on it. Also, outflows of FDI are also kind of investments. Usually they are investment into very high return projects abroad. And that, of course, enriches the country and it's and the investor. So you have to pay attention both for outflows and inflows. Now, venture capital, which I said is the most essential part of the development of the tech industry. You can see here in billions of US dollars, in various ways, the emergence of venture capital over the years peaked in 2021 and then started to drop. Now you might say, and here is another picture of venture capital for Israeli tech companies, and you can see how in 2021 we peaked and then we dropped. Okay. Sorry, I need Yoav or Carl to help me. So I gave you, a broad picture of what I consider the importance of regime changes for the development of the economy. I gave you a perspective of the effect on FDI and venture capital and tech FDI. And because explained, these are the top of the iceberg of the development of sustainable growth for the economy. I didn't mention here short-term behavior, what happens to the exchange rate, or what happened to the stock market and so forth. Because I'm an old-fashioned economist that's looking at long-run trend and structural changes rather than fluctuations up and down. Just, in parentheses, don't invest in Bitcoin, even though it passed the benchmark of 100,000. But when you see how volatile it is, and you should also see that how kind of harmful investment is to put money into Bitcoin for very soon, close parentheses. So now I switch in accordance of the sandwich between Hebrew and English that I put my presentation here into Hebrew after I broke my teeth for the entire thing, entire presentation. And here is lesium, the implication of what I was saying for the actual development in Israel. המהפכה המשפטית חוזרת בגדול עם גל ענק של חוקים בלתי ליברליים. מטרתם, כמו שהזכרתי בקונטקסט של אי-ליברליזם, עם כל הסוגים השונים של הדרך לבצע את הריכוז של השלטון בידי היחיד, כיוון אוטוקרטי, המטרתם של החוקים הבלתי ליברליים לצמצם את כוח בתי המשפט, לצמצם את הכוח של התקשורת החופשית, להקמה של גופי חקירה לא דמוקרטיים, להשתלטות על המשטרה, והדבר הכי חשוב שהיה צריך לעשות אחרי האסון שקראנו, הקמת ועדת חקירה משפטית שהייתה יכולה לחלץ אותנו מהמגמה הזאת של האי-ליברליזם, לא עומדת להיות מוקמת בקרוב. אז לסיום אני מצטער להגיד שממרומי הגיל שלי, אני חושב שמהשיעור הקצר הזה שנתתי פה, אני מאוד מאוד לא נח מהרגשה שהפלא הכלכלי של ישראל הוא נחלת העבר. תסלחו לי על הסגירה הזו של הדיון. אוקיי.
I hesitate to clap hands when it's such a dark note, but this is for your appreciation of the achievement. So this leaves us some time for Q&A, and I'll kick off with some of my own questions. In terms of investment flows, life is about alternatives. My question to you is, to the extent of illiberal policies gaining ground in Europe, will that somehow stem the outflow or increase the inflow paradoxically into Israel, in the sense that this is becoming a wider norm, or we expect to see less investment in general, even in Europe, if investors are less secure with the rights? My other question is, looking at the graphs that you presented, they demonstrate correlation between investment flows. Or they suggest, this is not, we still have to have more data past 2023 to establish this, but assuming this is indeed a correlation between investment flows and illiberal policies. As a political scientist, I'm wondering about the causality. That means there's also, the illiberalism is not just an external event that, like an asteroid hits, it has its own sources. And maybe you can say a few words about the other direction of causality. Let's take a few more questions, Alfred.
Yes, why don't I answer them, because I will
Okay.
forget.
Okay.
I'm not that quick. I'm not forgetful. So investment flows in Europe of various kinds in Hungary, for example, I didn't have it here. You can see also the investment flow drop. Let me just say, to cover myself, there are multiple factors behind changes in macroeconomics. And by no means I isolated the effect of the FDI, of regime change on FDI, because there are so many other things. Just to name it, there was the Great Recession, for the war and all of that, and the fall of the stock markets and debt problems, you name it. So these are just for illustration what I did. And I'm embarking now on research, partly econometrics, to isolate this, which is not easy. But as far as Europe is concerned, you are much more knowledgeable about Europe, but Hungary and PIS Poland are not spreading as of yet into the rest of Europe. By the way, it occurred to me that I didn't spend time, although it was in my slide, that Poland was not only benefited from moving out of communism into a free market kind of regime, but it's also, in terms of its illiberal trends, didn't go all the way to autarky, thanks to its being a member of the European Union. It separates what happens to Poland from Israel. Israel does have this blocking and guards. And this is the beautiful part of the European Union, that will basically confine their members to, of course, some space, but still, until now, it was able to prevent this fall in complete autarky, except for Hungary, and it's now being isolated from European Union. Anyway, as far as just to conclude about your first question, the investment in Europe from let's say its sources outside of Europe is of course changing a lot. That was they got a lot of investment from America, and something is happening now in America, including putting tariffs or something that could hamper investment into Europe. It is trying to develop a connection to China, but again, it creates conflict to the US. So there are it's a much more complicated kind of issue how to explain the flows of investment from outside of Europe into Europe. Now, as far as the second question that was on the mark, basically the graphs are correlations. But I just told you that as an economist, in order to publish these things, I have to embark in a research that, can isolate this particular effect. So it's a first impression of the connection between, and I encourage political scientists like you to develop it. Okay? Well, Alfred?
Yes, well, I will go over from something that you related to. And this is the general trend in the world, at least for trade in goods and services, towards less globalization and more protectionism. We know from laws of international trade that on the whole, small countries are much more sensitive to declines of globalization than large countries. And I am worried that your black picture that you draw at the end is even worse now that the Trump administration has announced at least, that it's going to be much more protectionist. And Israel, for its high-tech export, is very sensitive to what goes on in the large market of the United States rather than Europe. So I would like to tell us if you think really that this protectionist trend that is we are contemplating in the United States and maybe in other parts of the world is going to impact negatively on foreign direct investment in Israel. So I am relating to another fact.
Well, very tough question. Let me just try to give my thought about it. The protectionism with the emergence of Trump is, of course, will affect very adversely the US.
Yeah.
And also the exporters. Europe is a good exporter to, but also there will be possibility of retaliations like China and maybe Europe. So there is sort of spiral down. So your point is very well taken. It's very in the short term until we move out of these 4 years under Trump. It's really downward trend for globalization for sure, and also for FDI. I didn't explain the mechanism where FDI is also related to goods trade and all of that, and the effect of tariffs on FDI. I mean, everything in economics is connected, but in this case, it's very directly connected. Now, how it affects Israel? I don't know if the export of Israel to the US will be directly subject to tariffs.
Yeah.
I don't know. Because the name of the game when you introduce tariff regime is the exceptions. This is why, everybody is warning us about the Trump protectionism, that it will create tremendous exceptions, like in crony capitalism, you give the exception only to your friends, so to speak. So it's sort of a second round of effect of protectionism that the structure of the American industry and all of that will be affected through this kind of crony capitalism. But as far as Israel is concerned, if Israel is getting the exception, one incentive is for other countries to locate their, and Israel will basically emerge beneficial. In other case, Israel has a very good market possibilities in China. And once the Western world is fighting with China in terms of tariffs and all of that, you don't know how China will react to retaliate for that, and that could affect Israel badly. So it's complicated things, as always in economics.
So we stand to earn some rents from rerouting of American trade.
Rerouting, that's a word. But the question is whether we'll get the exemption.
Okay, Rachel?
Yeah.
Yes, I have a very basic question. I'm not an economist.
She's
Is
a
it,
lawyer.
Okay,
no, but
we salute the lawyers, especially when you talk about judicial reforms.
not about that only.
I know.
My
but
question is
salute
very basic, just as a, just
the
as
role
a,
of the lawyers are very important.
just common logic of every person, I think, also illiberal politicians, they would like the economy to flourish. Otherwise, also their voters might become unsettled and so they would not like to harm the economy, their own economy. So when it's becoming quite clear that economy is suffering from illiberal regimes, is it possible for such an illiberal regime to, on the one hand, to keep those laws with competition, with free trade and so on, in order to keep the economy flourishing, and on the other hand, to destruct the courts in the country, the media, and all the rest that we know? Do you know any example or any?
It's a great question, and I don't have full answer, but I would like to challenge you on that question, because flourishing economy or not could also be associated with populistic policies, which are by their very nature short run. Populism is populist person or policymakers is someone who never think about 2 years from
Long
now.
term.
Secondly, the instruments of policies that they might adopt, including, tariffs. Tariffs could be very harmful to the constituency of the Republicans, even in the short run, because they increase the price and the low-income groups will pay in relatively more than the rich people like us. And so it's a fundamental question in political economy. How can you explain that the voters that bring up politicians who are populists like that, it's part of the fact that if you do a real analysis, they will suffer from it.
Yeah.
How do they do it? It's a puzzle in political economy. I'll tell you because my son is professor of political economics at London School of Economics. And I challenge him with this, and something that they don't know how to explain it. Obviously, it has to do with manipulating the information and exploiting the backwardness and the uninformation, unskilled, uneducation this is how you know the populists are moving. But it's still a mystery to me. But the point is that the populist policy do not bring prosperity.
No.
That they basically bring out, you know, train wreck for the economy.
Thank you.
Look at our minister who thought about it.
Yes, yes.
Possibly one last question before we break for lunch? No one dares stand between us and lunch. Oh, of course not. So join me in thanking Professor Lee for